Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, Stories from the 78, with a story that far exceeds the reaches of the 78 because this goes across the galaxy. I'm talking about the story of father and son, Adam and Leonard Nimoy. Adam wrote a book about his relationship with his dad called The Most Human, where he shares a lot of stuff in there that would apply to a lot of people who have a difficult relationship with their parents or their father, for specifically father or son. Either way, I am honored to welcome Adam now to the Stories from the 78. How you doing, Adam?
Tom, I'm great. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I've talked to a few folks who have had complicated relationships with their parents, but not one that has been on display for the entire country and, now the world to see. I imagine that was cathartic, terrifying, or all of the above to be able to put that down in a book.
Well, yeah, I kind of touched on it a little bit, Tom, in my film about my dad and Mr. Spock, For the Love of
Mm.
Spock. I talked a little bit about my relationship, my complicated relationship with my dad. I'm a guy who's been in recovery for 20 years, and I share this story anonymously in these 12-step meetings I go to, and it seems to resonate with people who have their own difficult issues with a parent and are trying to figure a way to get some resolution going. And my dad and I were very lucky that 12-step recovery is what really helped us kind of pull it together and kind of reconnect with one another.
All right, we're talking about your dad, Leonard Nimoy, the late Leonard Nimoy, and you talked about a letter that you got that kind of changed that, and that harkens back to what you're talking about. Can you walk folks through that who might not have be familiar with that story?
Yeah, well, my dad and it was a very interesting relationship. It was kind of a combination of incredible experiences because of my dad's phenomenal success. I mean, a lot of great things happened to the Nimoy family. A lot of great things and opportunities happened to me, being the son of Leonard Nimoy.
Hmm.
And I had a lot of great memories with my dad, and I was always very proud of my dad due to his phenomenal success. When we had differences of opinion, we got into some pretty difficult conflict with one another with no way to really resolve any of that, and it was all kind of exacerbated by my pot smoking habit and my dad's alcoholism. Did not help us at all, and it kind of came to a low point where my dad wrote me a letter, a long letter, kind of listing a lot of his grievances against me, a lot of the reasons why he thought I was the problem in the relationship, a lot of my shortcomings, what we call character defects in recovery.
Hmm.
He had taken my inventory, is what we like to say,
Yeah.
and it was very difficult to receive that letter, to read that letter. But friends of mine in recovery said it was an opportunity for me to make an amends to my dad and put some of that to rest, which I reluctantly at first did. I just apologized to him for everything in the letter, and then after that, everything changed in our relationship.
How I mean, when you read that letter, you said you were, not exactly happy with it. I mean, were you kind of like, what the hell is this? Like, I haven't talked to you and you're blaming me for all these things. Was it really hard to hear him out in that way? Being the son going like, how am I even supposed to feel bad for you? You're like this, you have this career, you have all this fame, and you're blaming me about this kind of stuff for reasons why we're not close. I mean, I would piss me off. You know what I mean? As just a normal son thinking about my dad if he did something like that.
Well, it did. It was upsetting and it did piss me off. I
Yeah,
mean,
it should.
look, I got to, again, Tom, I'm an addict in recovery, and my first impulse when people piss me off is to be pissed off,
Sure.
and to react,
Sure. Yeah.
but that's the whole point of recovery is to try to calm yourself down. And it's not just about me. And yeah, I mean, you touched on it. It's very interesting. It's like, fame and fortune does not, necessarily mean you're going to be happy for the
Mhm.
rest of your life. That is just not the way it works. My dad could be really, miserable about a lot of stuff, and he was. There were a lot of things that happened that he was not happy about in his life, frustrations in his own career. So fame and fortune does not equal happiness necessarily at all. And it was just a bad period of his life that, and we've gone through this before. This is why it was no surprise to me,
Sure.
really.
Mhm.
I had a lot of low points with my dad, particularly several years before, back in the in the 80s when my parents were getting divorced and my dad was really kind of down and making The Good Mother was a film he was making, which was a real downer film, and he was still drinking. And I'd been these peaks and valleys with my dad many times before. So the letter was not completely surprising, but but yeah, it made me very angry. I have to go to blow it off in a 12-step meeting and not react to this stuff. We have all kinds of sayings in recovery: restrain of pen and tongue, let go and let God, don't just do something, sit there, contrary action, count to 10, count to 20, all in an attempt to get control of our brain so that we don't say stuff that we're going to regret later on. And that's kind of what happened with that letter.
I mean, that's some restraint just because, I mean, I'm not an addict, but if my dad did that to me for one reason or other, and I get the complexity of the relationship of why this all played out, but even in normal stuff, if somebody's calling me out for something, I feel like it was unwarranted or a little like, well, how about you look at yourself first, you know? I mean, that's just got to be so difficult, and hence why you wrote it down and you have this book to discuss all this. I mean, but if you can walk me back to like the beginning, because I read a little bit about you seeing your dad pop up, on starring, special roles that pop up here and there in television, and all of a sudden he comes home with a Polaroid of him in the whole look. I mean, was it complicated before all that stuff, or did it kind of just all take off with Star Trek?
Well, no, I mean, it was a complicated relation to begin with. I was not close to my dad when I was a kid. I talk a lot in the book about the fact that my dad and I had very different upbringings because my dad was born, his parents were Russian immigrants. First of all, they came from Ukraine, but they considered themselves Russian back
Sure.
then. And they were and they came from a small village and ended up in the middle of Boston, downtown Boston. A culture shock right there. And they were
Yep.
not very, emotive, you know, um, warm and fuzzy people. And I love them. I had a great relationship with them, but they were not demonstrative, as my dad would say. And, my dad grew up and his whole mindset was he didn't care that much about academics. He wanted to pursue his acting career. He got the acting bug when he was growing up in Boston, but he was also just hustling, trying to make money during the
Hmm.
Depression. It was
Yeah.
all about odd jobs. I mean, the guy was selling newspapers on the Boston Common in the middle of winter during World War II. So, and I had a very different upbringing than that. I was born in sunny Southern California. And when I was 10 years old, Star Trek went on the air and things got pretty comfy around the Nimoy household. I didn't have, a paper route. I didn't have to get, work odd jobs. And there was just this huge generational gap between us. And my dad's priority was not really the family. And he's admitted this in many interviews. His priority was surviving in his career because I was born in 56, and between 56 and 66, 10 years, it was a struggle, and he was focused on trying to get something going in Hollywood while working all these odd jobs to keep the family going.
Hmm.
So I never had a connection to him to begin with as a young kid. We did not hang out and go to ball games. He didn't even come to my little league games. We didn't hang out and watch TV together. We just didn't have that kind of relationship. And when I was with him alone, it was very awkward. So by the time I was a teenager and I started you know, asserting myself as most teens do,
Yeah.
it just
Especially
led to
teen
it was
boys with
just
their
a
dad.
yeah, it was just a
Yeah.
recipe for disaster between the two of us.
Yeah, you mentioned there was an excerpt that you wrote where it says, "But the awkwardness that defined our early relationship blossomed into conflict," which I find funny that you use blossomed into conflict, but it's a great writing. Sometimes smoldering, sometimes open and intense, and those were occasional flashes of warmth in between that and the arguments and the hurt feelings, something akin to love. That's tough. That defining of a period in your life when you're talking about your father.
Yeah, I don't think I'm alone though. That's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of people from of baby boomers who had people of that generation who grew up during the Great Depression. A very difficult period of time in American history, world history,
Yeah.
and they're just we're just very, very different from what happened to just generationally. My dad was much closer to his parents, and he and I had this huge gap in our relationship just based on our upbringing. So I'm not alone. This is the thing. A lot of
Right, right.
people have experienced that.
Did it bother your dad, at the time? Do you think it bothered him that he wasn't close to you when you were a kid? Or was it one of those things where he just put his head down and got through it? Because that's what a lot of people did back then.
I just think that, he was really preoccupied with the work he was doing. This guy was, look, he came to LA with nothing. His parents would not help him or support him in any way. When he told them he wanted to be an actor, it was like saying he wanted to join the circus. I
Mhm.
mean, they wanted
Right.
doctors and lawyers. I mean, these are people who wanted their kids to live the American dream and go to college and become professionals. And his older brother did that. His older brother went to Northeastern and MIT and became a chemical engineer for Johnson and Johnson for 30 years.
Wow.
That's what they
No,
expected from Leonard.
right. No pressure, huh?
No, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, they had expectations that he was not going to meet, and they had a big falling out because of that. And even with my dad's phenomenal success, my grandparents were giddy about all that. I mean, they were just, the fans were writing them letters, and my grandmother was sharing these things. She'd be embarrassed, but she loved all the attention. She didn't know what it meant, and I never really heard them say that they loved my dad or they were proud of what my dad had accomplished. So. I think look, I don't know if I think it was difficult for my dad that we didn't have a close relationship, but it's just that's just the way the cards went down between the two of us. And the whole point of the book, Tom, is that like I'm trying not to blame the guy or point a
Right. Of
finger at
course.
the guy or judge the guy. That's just the way it was dealt. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do it because it's been an amazing experience. My life has just been amazing being his son. I mean, I love Spock. I love seeing images of Spock. I mean, the guy is everywhere. He's omnipresent, and there are fans all over the world. There are millions of fans all over the world. When they figure out I'm related to Leonard, I still feel the warmth and the love that my dad generated. So, I'm really happy about it. But we had a difficult time, and we needed help figuring out what to do.
And now that you look back, and you are, you've lived a little bit of life, and those that relationship with your dad complicated things for you as a kid, being, a teenager to a young adult, and you mentioned that you've struggled with addiction. So how does it all come out in the wash for you?
Well, okay, the big picture, the zoom out is how do you break the cycle of intergenerational conflict? And what can I do to help my dad help myself? Now,
Hmm.
my dad was sober, but he was not really working a program of recovery. On the other hand, was still going to meetings, and I still had a real community of people who were giving me direction and said, "This is what you got to do. You got to go make an amends." Even though I didn't think he deserved it. He
Hmm.
never made an amends to me, and he'd been sober longer than I had. But it was explained to me that the amends is really not for him. It's for me to let go of my own stuff towards my dad. And
Hmm.
the fact is, when I made the apology to him, he was ready himself to let go of all this stuff. Because I talk about in the book the fact that immediately after the amends was over, he invited me to Shabbat dinner the following Friday night, and everything changed after that. And when I suffered some personal tragedy in my life shortly thereafter, my dad was the go-to guy for me. He was the dad I always needed him to be because he was semi-retired and focused more on family and not on his career and survival anymore. So that's what was important. And the other thing that I point out in the book is that even I have my own kids
Hmm.
who I was very close to because they were born in Southern California, and I was much more I could afford to have a much more rounded existence in that I had a career, I had ambition, I had a profession practicing law to begin with, and I still wanted to be around my kids and go to ball games and coach their soccer and play music with my son Jonah.
The everyday
Um,
stuff.
yeah, I mean, I had a much more well-rounded kind of lifestyle where I could be around to help raise the kids and not just be focused totally on my career. Even so, my kids still found plenty of reasons to just hate me
Yeah. Wow.
because that's just the way it is. And I made my own mistakes. I tried to not make the mistakes that my dad, I felt, had made in raising me. I made my own mistakes and it pissed my kids off. And we still had conflict. The issue is how do you deal with that?
Hmm.
And the fact of the matter is, because we were close and we had this love connection, we were able to get through a lot of this stuff without all this recrimination and without the need of me writing letters to them or them writing letters to me. We just had a much more fluid relationship in family therapy, in the fact that I had a lot of a recovery and a lot of self examination, and we were just able to get through a lot of stuff that my dad and I simply could not do.
Do you think if your dad was here now to hear you say that, I imagine he would be proud of the fact that you were able to get to a point where you guys wouldn't or couldn't get to?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, look, we had a really close and loving relationship the last 7 or 8 years of his life. There's no doubt about it.
Hmm.
I mean, we were, I even came up with this idea of going with him to Boston and I hired the camera crew. We did a whole walk around town talking about his upbringing and all the places he worked and all the memories he had being in Boston. And that was my way of like paying homage to my dad and the respect and the love and a tribute to him and what he had accomplished. I mean, because the fact of the matter is, the trajectory of his life is phenomenal. I mean, really. I mean, the guy,
Yeah.
this Jewish kid out of Boston, the son of immigrants with really nothing, came to L.A. and just the impact that Spock has had on popular culture is indelible. I mean, it's just there forever. So, I really wanted to honor him and what he had achieved by coming up with this idea of making this documentary. So that was just one example of the ways that he and I had become very close and had a really wonderful, loving and fun relationship with one another. So and I think my dad was very proud of the fact of where we had come and how far we how close we had managed to get with one another. And what's really interesting is that my dad noticed in my son Jonah, who was just like my dad. I mean, Jonah was a disaster in school,
Uh-huh. I was.
complete disaster,
Hmm.
because he was into rock and roll, and from a very early age, he had a lot of talent on drums and guitar. It was very clear. And his mother and I recognized it in him. And my dad recognized that in him in a way that his own parents didn't see it in my dad. So,
Oh
I mean,
man,
my dad and Jonah had a very close relationship because my dad could see himself in Jonah,
that.
and now Jonah's all over the world with the Offspring, for the past 7 years, playing guitar and percussion and keyboards for them, and
Yeah, just
and
saw them
living.
here in Riot Fest.
Yeah, well, there you go, man. They've
Yeah.
been all over. They just finished a U.S. tour, and now they're about to go to South Africa, and Jonah's living the dream. I mean, they say that real talent skips a generation, and because those guys were so dedicated to their art in a way that I didn't have that kind of passion, and I really respect that. And I think, and my dad, I think, was very proud of the fact that we were able to fix family issues and stay close together.
I've talked to several people over the years of who've had difficult relationships, particularly a chef here in Chicago who's world renowned, but it's not my story to tell here. But world renowned chef, James Beard Award winner, but didn't talk about his family for years and years and years, and recently opened up about the fact about his family and the difficulties, addiction, and everything else. And we asked him like, what are you most proud of now? And he didn't even skip a beat. He said, my family, because he came from really, really tough. He had an alcoholic father who was difficult at best. He didn't get into the details, but the point being that it was really, really rough upbringing, but he wanted, similar to what you're talking about, create a life for him and his family, his kids, that was different what he didn't have with his family. And now that is the thing that he is most proud of, not about the James Beard Awards or about all the many restaurants and everything else, but the fact that he has a family that he always craved as a child and created that for himself now and for the generations to follow. He's proud of how close they are, which I thought was a great answer to a question. So it sounds similar to what you're talking about your father and his relationship with his grandson.
Well, the interesting thing about that, Tom, is that, like, my dad, we had a good family growing up that supported my dad. My mother never wavered in her support of my dad. And when the paparazzi started showing up, I have dozens and dozens of fan magazines of us, Leonard Nimoy and his family, and my dad was very proud of that he had a family to showcase. Now, we were
Right.
not that close and loving necessarily, but we did support him and we were proud of him. And my dad really liked the idea of having a family.
Right.
He just didn't put in the work that was really required to deal with some of these family issues because he couldn't. Number one, he didn't have the tools, and number two, he didn't have the time. But I think family was important to him too. And in the end, that's the whole thing, is that his priority had really changed. So I can relate to what you're saying, because after that, it was all about family for him.
Right. And you know what? I mean, that's why you live life, right? To you get to where you never thought you would get to. Perhaps one day you surprise yourself and get there, right? So it was interesting. The parallels just kind of popped when you were talking about it. When your father was, in the middle of the series for Star Trek, and you're the kid. What do you remember like fondly about that time? You talked about some of the difficulties, but like, were there like backyard parties that you were like, oh, there's, William Shatner, or there's this, or there's that, or like, or was it just constant work, work, work all the time?
Well, no, I mean, a lot of look, I was old enough to know to remember what it was like before and after, and
Right.
that I am so grateful for,
Sure.
because I was 10 when the show went on the air, and everything changed, everything. There was just immense popularity for Spock almost immediately, and as I said, excuse me, the paparazzi started showing up regularly at our house. I have so much documentation, so many photographs of the family, and there was travel. My dad started immediately was into theater and started doing plays. We were going to personal appearances with him all over the country. There was the recording career, Mr. Spock's Music from Outer Space,
Yeah.
and we would go to these record store signings. They would be mobs of people there trying to get Spock's signature. We were in parades, the Hollywood Christmas parade. We were in a Rose Parade up in Portland, Oregon. We were traveling to the East Coast for Fiddler on the Roof. He was in Summer Theater. We were in Spain. He was making a movie with Yul Brynner. I mean, stuff was happening.
That's
You know,
incredible.
it is incredible. And the kids at school, were like found out that I was related to Leonard, and it was like sometimes it was mayhem in the classroom when they would find out that I was, Spock's son. I mean, it was
Right,
just
yeah. Not just
everything
related, you're his
changed.
son. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
like, almost like the torch, the golden torch passing along, right? Did that come with any added pressure though for you as a person to be your own person?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the whole point of why I like continued on and went to college and went to law school. It's like, dude, you got to do something. This is not. It's his success.
Right.
I'm enjoying the fruits of it, and I'm basking in the glow of all this heat that he created. But this is the hard part of being in a celebrity family. It ain't me.
Right.
It's
That's
not me. It's
daunting.
his. That's his bag, and I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. Now, luckily, I'm like him. I had some direction and passion, which was to go to college and then go to law school. I mean, I just
Mm.
wanted to do something that Leonard could not do, which was, get a postgraduate degree. He never would have been able to do that. That was just not his thing at
Mhm.
all. And a lot of us, start off trying to create our own identity separate and apart from our dad. We want to be something very different from him. But then after practicing law for 7 years, when I found out what it was really like to be in the practice of law, whether you're on the corporate side or in the private practice side, is just it wasn't for me. It was just not. It was not creative. It was a lot of paper pushing. It was just at a desk all day long, on the phone all day long, and it was like, I don't know if I can continue to do this. And then I got invited to an acting class with Jeff Corey, who was my dad's acting teacher. Jeff was semi-retired and teaching classes up in Malibu. Invited me to come out for the day, and it was like, oh my God! It was just I had this epiphany. It's like I think I got to think about making a career move. And I discussed it with my dad, and he was very supportive because I didn't have the passion for practicing law that I thought I had, but it was really just not there. And I
Mhm.
and I really got turned on by the work that was happening in acting class, and really wanted to think about pursuing, a more creative career like my dad. This is the weird conundrum. It's like first you just want to do anything but what, and be separate and apart from your old man, diametrically opposed, and
Right.
then you just want to be like him.
Was it funny for him to hear that, like I always kind of knew kind of a way, or was he like, what? What are you talking about?
No, I think, he was very receptive to it. And at the time, when I was married at the time to my first wife, Nancy, and she was working, she had a good job. I was able to take a couple years off and make a transition. And I worked hard at it, studying at night, UCLA Extension, private classes. And then my dad helped me. I got a job on Star Trek Six. I was observing Nick Meyer and hanging around on the set. And then I was observing on Star Trek: The Next Generation for a year. And
Hmm.
then, my dad really, helped open up some opportunities for me. Then he and I collaborated on the Outer Limits. We remade this episode that he was in. This was a part of my upbringing that you were kind of alluding to. When I
Yeah.
was a kid before Star Trek, I'd be watching TV and he'd pop up everywhere. My dad had bit roles on all these TV shows, and my favorite really was that Outer Limits episode, I, Robot. Where my dad played a reporter, and I just loved that episode, and I loved him in it. And then we came up with this idea of he agreed to do it. He would reprise he would play the lead role in that episode, and we would rewrite it, and I would direct it, and we pitched it to Showtime. They were remaking the series, and they said yeah. And that was an episode that really that's where I really kind of transformed myself. My dad was helping me, giving me advice. He was teaching me about the craft. And that episode, that was my third episode of TV where I really felt like, okay, I'm beginning to figure out how this thing works and really enjoying myself in the process.
Yeah, almost like a full circle moment for you, because watching him early on in his career popping up everywhere to now directing the episode with your dad's help. I mean, that was had to be wild experience for you.
It was for both of us. It was the high point, in our, again, this is my relationship with my dad. It was highs and lows for
Hmm.
years. We just couldn't find that medium of, can we just like be fine all the time?
Yeah.
It was
Well,
either these great memories and these great experiences or this ridiculous conflict of verbal warfare, my dad would call it. And the other thing, Tom, I got to tell you, is like my dad warned me very early on that arguing with him was going to be tough because he was a very vocal, verbal guy, and he could be very loud. That was number one. Number two, he was basically just a tough kid from the streets of Boston, and you don't screw around with him. That was number two. And number
yep.
three, he was rich and famous. He said, for those three reasons, you're going to have a tough time arguing with me. And he was right, but it didn't stop me from trying.
Right. Well, no kid. I don't think any son will step down from a good argument with their dad if they feel like
No,
they're right. Right.
no,
I don't
no.
care how much money you have. You're wrong, and here's why.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, exactly. Or how popular you are.
right. Yeah. They don't know you like I do. Right. Because you're the son.
Exactly.
Exact. Yeah, I'm very familiar. Oh man, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Adam. And you're going to be here in Chicago on the 17th of November for a couple of appearances. And how can people find out more and follow what you do?
Well, just go to my website. All my social media handles are there, www.adamnimoy.com. The whole schedule is there, where I'm going to be and all the particulars. There's newsletters, there's updates, there's photos. There's a real good time. If you just go to that website, you'll get all the information you need.
And we've been talking about your book, The Most Human. It's reconciling with my father, Leonard Nimoy. I mean, it- what's next for you after this? I imagine this project just took a lot out of you emotionally just to get it down on paper. Some of it fun, some of it sad, and everything in between. But now that this is done, what's next for you?
Well, the focus now is over the next few months. I'm still, even though the book was published by Chicago Review Press, by the way,
Hmm.
give them a plug, your local press, and they've
Absolutely.
been terrific. We published in June, but it's been a phenomenal tour, and I really am just really now focused. I have another book coming out, which I'm not ready to really talk about yet, but I want to continue writing. I love writing. I love the craft of writing. I have a real passion for that, and that's what Leonard was all about: just staying with the passion, going with your passion. But for the next several months, in the month of November, I've got 12 dates to promote the book, and that's what my focus is.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and nothing but much success with the book and here in Chicago on the 17th, about a week before Thanksgiving. So you can get all that in and then get home to enjoy a little time with the family.
I will do so, Tom. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely.